It's been really, really hard to find any degree of light when you are reporting on this and you're seeing the images that I'm seeing every single day. Obviously, it takes a massive toll on your mental health. Journalists are very often afraid of talking about that because, again, it implies you're biased, you're not neutral. But also, if I was to say to you, do you find it disturbing the images that you are seeing of Palestinian children in Gaza? Of course you're going to say yes.
Yeah.
How can you not say yes? It is just affecting.
There's a lightheartedness to illustration and to your illustration and a wit, which I'm not getting from this conversation.
No.
I mean, has something happened to you? I mean,
miserable, Krishnan.
To be honest, you're coming over as that. And I'm wondering, were you a lighthearted, witty person who was trying to spread messages in a clever way, who has been beaten down by the realities of what's going on in Gaza? Or are you always like this, just making witty content?
I don't know. I'm quite lost, to be honest.
Hello and welcome to Ways to Change the World. I'm Krishnan Guru-Murthy, and this is the podcast in which we talk to extraordinary people about the big ideas and their lives and the events that have helped shape them. My guest today is Mona Chalabi, a Pulitzer Prize-winning data journalist, illustrator and writer. She's gained international recognition for her distinctive illustrations, which distill complex issues like wealth disparity and racial injustice into art that's very relatable and easily understood. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Krishnan.
How do you want to change the world?
I'm going to start with a very, very humble beginning. Maybe just have journalists describe what's happening in Gaza as a genocide.
So accuracy and truth is what you want.
Yeah. And I would say that the word genocide is a far more accurate word for journalists to be using than war. I think some of my work is about trying to present the evidence for why that language makes sense, right? So I'm trying to use data journalism to show what is the most accurate language we can be using to capture reality.
Okay. So lay out for me why genocide is the accurate way to describe it.
It's funny, I think part of the reason is because I take a longer view of things. So I think that for those of us who had been watching what had been happening in Palestine, it was very, very clear from November 2023, that this would be a genocide because we've seen genocidal behavior from the Israeli state towards Palestinians long before 2023. So this felt like it was a logical extension of that. And when I talk about genocidal behavior, I'm talking about state policies that don't allow for conditions of life to be bearable, to be healthy. The Israeli state is clearly upholding those conditions for Palestinian people and has been for a very long time.
So why, I mean, given you, it's the first thing you said, it's clearly important to you.
Yeah.
So why do you think it is so important to have that word used, given how contested it is and given how easy it is to end up down rabbit warrens that are irrelevant to what's actually happening, which is the mass killing and starvation of people in Gaza?
But I'm curious, why do those feel like they're rabbit warrens? Like it's just to say that mass killing.
Those arguments, what I mean is it's very easy to end up arguing with somebody about whether what's going on in Gaza is a genocide or not, and whether the intent is there or not, given the facts on the ground and what they could do and how many people they could kill if they were trying to exterminate the population, rather than actually concentrating on what's happening, which is 50 to 60,000 people dead, people starving. That's the key. So I mean that's why I'm saying to you, sort of, why is genocide as a word, as a definition, as a label for what's happening vital to you?
Because the language of war implies two-sidedness. It implies some degree of kind of equality between these two powers that are going after one another. And it doesn't capture this idea of oppressor and oppressed. It doesn't capture the idea of an apartheid state. I mean, even those statistics that you cite, part of the reason why they're flawed is because it is a genocide, you cannot accurately count the dead during a genocide, which is why 50,000 to 60,000 simply isn't correct. I'm not able to give you a perfect death toll to contradict that, but what I can say is that's the number
that the health ministry put out, and there's no way of obviously corroborating. Yeah. On top of that, there will obviously be deaths that are excess deaths as a result of what's been going on since October the 7th, to what would have happened otherwise. But that I suppose leads us to what you do, which is which is data. And obviously a data journalist is only as good as their data.
Yes.
So how would you describe the job of a data journalist?
Yeah. Is to convey information as accurately as possible. And in conveying it accurately, you're also letting audiences know the limitations of that data, right? So to go back to death tolls, I'm not saying to people who are viewing my work or reading my work, this is exactly what the death toll is. I'm saying it's somewhere between X and Y, and here's the information that we know to give us a sense of why it is between those two bounds. And they're things like, exactly as you were saying, like it's things like the spread of disease, it's do we know how many morgues are still operating? Do we know how many hospitals are just building mass graves outside to put people inside? So you're taking all of the information that you have available and communicating as accurately as possible as you can to audiences.
How did you hit on your style?
Yeah.
Which is about illustration.
Yeah. Honestly, it was frustration mostly. I was looking at a lot of these computer-generated graphics that I feel like actually overstate certainty. I think, for example, a lot of journalists are putting decimal places in places where they don't belong. I was really, really disillusioned actually by watching the way that data journalism was being used to predict US election outcomes. So I initially moved to the US to be in the US to practice data journalism in the US. I moved in 2013, so I watched the midterms in 2014 and then the presidential election in 2016 and became really, really frightened actually by the way that data journalism was being used. So I started to kind of draw to have this much more like kind of humble approach about what it is that the data can tell you. And the drawings also imply like a person, me, who has my own opinions, was responsible for drawing these illustrations. And people sometimes lose sight of that by the time that it's kind of embedded in a computer-generated graphic. So
what was it that was distressing you about the supposed accuracy of data journalism and the decimal points?
I think there's two things. One is that it's dishonest, right? So if you say Hillary Clinton has a 32.4% chance of winning, we don't know it to a decimal place. We don't know whether or not it's going to rain this afternoon to a decimal place. How could you possibly predict the behavior of millions of voters to a decimal place? So that's dishonest. Like, we have a responsibility to not only say the facts, but to communicate the degree to which we're certain about those facts. And the other thing is, like, I just think it's bad for democracy. I don't think it's good to say to a nation of people, this is who's going to win, before people have actually gone to the polls. And I think that we as journalists, I'm sure you do this all the time, Krishnan, and you don't just think about, like, what is the information to communicate? You're thinking about what are the consequences of the ways in which I'm communicating it? What are the ways in which this information that I'm sharing might affect people's behavior in ways positive and negative? And you have a responsibility to think beyond just like, what's the report? You have to think about how that report is going to live in the world after you've said it.
And so is that how you've approached all your stories as well?
Yeah.
So that your way of changing the world is your journalism.
Yeah, definitely. And I think in a way, though, it is still a little bit more humble than that, I would hope, which is not that I'm necessarily trying to like make these enormous changes. I actually think very often I'm just trying to limit harm. Like, I think that even this example that I was giving about the language of genocide, I think that the language of war is harmful in understanding what is happening in Palestine right now. And I think the word genocide limits that harm that is being done in terms of misinformation.
I suppose to come back to that example.
Yeah.
It's not entirely accurate either, though, is it? Because genocide suggests an entirely one-sided conflict, which Gaza isn't. It may not be a war, a war between two armies. It may not be anything like an equal battle, but there are two sides trying to fight each other.
Can you give me an example of a genocide that you think does meet that definition of genocide? Where there was
genocide is not something I ever define. I will report when a genocide is found. And so that might be Cambodia or Rwanda or in Bosnia-Herzegovina or in the Second World War.
In all of those examples, though, were there not instances where there was
they were a fight.
Yeah, there was a fight.
Yeah.
And I think it is really interesting when we're saying, when do we as journalists just say this is a genocide, right? There are so many human rights organizations, Amnesty International, you know all of them already, Krishnan. You know the states that have also come up and said this is a genocide. Like, is it that we're waiting for the British government to say that it's a genocide before we then feel comfortable using that language?
I think this is, we've got ourselves into a real mess over calling what's going on in Gaza a genocide or not, because we are all waiting for a court of law, which is never going to happen. And so we've ended up in this situation where, mainstream media, if you like, feels unable to use the word in its normal reportage because it doesn't know sort of what's its source. If it's contested, why do you say, yes, but it's been ruled as a genocide? That's the problem.
I hear you. It is contested. And, it's part of the reason actually why so much of my work is focused on Palestine is this contestation, right? Like what is happening in Sudan right now is absolutely horrific and is not getting the attention that it deserves. And yet so much of my attention is still focused on Palestine because there is a broad consensus that what's happening in Sudan is genocide.
And there is definitely genocidal intent in Sudan.
And there is definitely genocidal intent in Palestine when this number of Israeli high-ranking politicians have said, we want to exterminate the Palestinian people. They have expressed genocidal language
there
over
are
and
people
over and
with
over
genocidal intent.
Yeah, but then even in the case of Sudan, how many politicians does it take to express genocidal intent for us to say it's a genocide? Like, it's two totally different standards that are being applied. And I hear you that it's like, let's just get on with telling the facts. But to me, let's just get on with telling the facts is to use the word genocide, Yeah.
But why are you more distressed? You clearly are distressed by it, by this mass killing, than you are about the one that's also going on right now in Sudan.
It's not that I'm more distressed, it's that this one is contested in a different kind of way. I watch my colleagues readily using the language of genocide in Sudan, rightly so, to describe that scale of suffering and to describe, again, it's about intent, it's not just about the scale of the suffering.
Well, America said it was genocide.
Exactly. America's come forward and said it. And yet the British and the American governments are not saying that this is a genocide. And therefore that's where, because it's contested, that's where I'm focusing all of my energy. And I think I am distressed because I feel like these are my colleagues that I'm witnessing using language that I don't think is accurate. And I'm disappointed and frustrated with that. And also because I'm disappointed and frustrated in the ways that Palestinian journalists are not being heard and listened to. Palestinian journalists are saying this is a genocide. They are there. They are living it day after day. They are literally going without food as they're trying to report. They're coming on screen and saying that their family members have been killed. And they're describing it as a genocide. And I see no reason to not believe what they're saying.
Then I suppose we have to get to sort of what lies underneath it, which I guess is racism.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there's plenty of racism as well against Sudan. I want to make that absolutely clear. Part of the reason why the world hasn't paid sufficient attention to the genocide there is because of the way that Black bodies aren't respected and valued in the same way that, let's say, white bodies elsewhere might be. And I would say that the case of Palestine, part of the reason why it also takes up so much of my attention is because it is this confluence of so many things. Here is colonialism taking place before our very eyes. Here is Islamophobia. Here is anti-Arab hatred. It's everything.
How have you seen that in the course of your work?
You see it in the reporting itself. One of the very earliest pieces that I did in October, actually, I believe I published it like October 18th, was an analysis of pieces that were published in the New York Times. I worked with a researcher called Holly Jackson to do this. She had already looked at biases in New York Times reporting when it came to Israel-Palestine, so I reached back out to her. And she scraped all of these New York Times articles and looked at, and this is again just in the first few weeks, looked at the number of mentions of Israeli deaths versus Palestinian deaths, was able to show a wildly disproportionate coverage of Israeli deaths, and was also able to show the way that the language really, really matters, right? Israelis were described as being massacred, slain, murdered, and Palestinians were simply... They weren't even killed, actually. More often it was Palestinians dead, Palestinians who have died. And we see this over and over again, this use of this passive language in headlines and in articles that again implies that there's something almost natural about the way that Arabs die.
And what was the response in the New York Times to your observations?
Well, I actually pitched the data to the New York Times initially before I published it myself. And they said, no, thank you. I wouldn't say they were particularly interested in the same types of articles that I was interested in. At the time, I'd pitched them this piece about, again, the disproportionate coverage that the New York Times has been doing. I'd also pitched them a piece about how birthright trips might change in the future. not particularly interested in that. Yeah, I...
Just explain birthright trips.
So birthright trips are... they are... I mean, it's something that I saw even in my secondary school. I saw people that were in my secondary school go off and do birthright, which is a funded trip to Israel with the stated purpose of improving relations with the state, only for Jewish people. And as the language implies, it is reinforcing this idea that when you go to Israel, this is your birthright. This land belongs to you, regardless of where you were born, regardless of where your parents, your grandparents were born, this is yours. It was fascinating, actually. The people that went and did birthright had a very different reaction to me when they came back. I felt like our relationships changed. I was the only Arab person in my school, and suddenly we weren't friends anymore. And I find it very, very troubling that there are many, many journalists who have done birthright trips who don't need to disclose that as a potential source of bias in their reporting. There are journalists in very, very senior positions who have family members that are currently serving in the IDF, as well as having done birthright themselves, and that doesn't compromise their objectivity. Whereas for me, the mere fact of being an Arab means that my opinion on Palestine and Israel is inherently tainted. Of course I'm biased. Of course I'm siding with the Palestinians. Yeah.
And did you just feel that from the way people spoke to you, or were you confronted with it? Were you accused of bias?
Accused of being pro-Palestinian because of my... it wasn't stated as a well, it wasn't an accusation. It was, what happened was I used to work for these places who would hire me to do journalism, right? To do my job, which is to gather research, to gather the facts, to scrutinize the facts, to question the facts, and then to report them as accurately as possible. And all of a sudden, after October, as I said, they said no to all of my pitches that were based on journalism. And instead, I had one approach from an opinion desk at the New York Times saying, can you write about what it feels like to be an Arab Muslim woman watching what's happening in Palestine? And I found that very, very upsetting. And you're seeing this, by the way, across the board, right? Arab journalists are not really being trusted. I mean, it's shifted a little bit, actually, as the genocide has gone on. But especially early on, we weren't trusted to report on what was happening. We were being asked to write opinion pieces. And it's a way of reinforcing this idea of like, it's all very complicated. It's about identity politics. It's Muslims versus Jews, which is also absolute crap. There aren't many left, but there are still Palestinian Christians living in Gaza today. And the way that the Israeli apartheid state operates is not based on whether you are Muslim or Jewish. It operates based on whether you are Jewish or anything else. I definitely
so as soon as you started wanting to apply your journalism to this conflict, and that was when they weren't interested.
Yes, absolutely.
And do you feel that your career as a result, I mean, is being cancelled? Or
no, I wouldn't go that far. I think it's complicated. And also, again, I think about the ways that I talk about this stuff and the impact that it has on people who are watching and listening. I don't want to imply that if you speak up about what the truth is, and that's literally all that I feel that I have done. By the way, when I spoke to the New York Times, I said, are you able to point to any of my work that I have done since October that has had any factual errors or inaccuracies? And the answer was no. So I stand by absolutely everything that I've done. And I don't want to send a message that if you tell the truth, you will be punished. I think that's really, really harmful and has such a chilling effect. I would also say, by the way, yes, I pitched it to the New York Times first before I published it. But as journalists, don't we always speak publicly in order to hold people to account? Like, it's such a journalistic thing to do, to say this is where things are going wrong. And I made it very, very clear that I actually think on many other subjects, the New York Times does phenomenal journalism. But anyway, I just want to quickly say that I did write to them afterwards and said, I really, really hope you reconsider and we can work together again. Again, this is very, very early on in October. Things feel very, very different now. It might have actually been early November. And they wrote back and I said, unless you are able to point to a single factual error, this feels punitive. And they said, unfortunately, that is our position currently.
Right.
So
you are still the data editor of the Guardian US.
Yeah.
Do they publish whatever you want?
No one gets published with whatever you want. Of course, you still have editors and of course there's still negotiation. But I feel that my job there, I'm able to report the truth more effectively, more efficiently. Yeah. That's why I'm now.
More truthfully.
More truthfully, yeah. I for example, I pitched an article about Israeli settlements It's just using UN data about Israeli settler attacks, how many are taking place per year, what the nature of those attacks are.
And so what has been your response, having sort of lost one of your big outlets and the place where you won the Pulitzer Prize in the New York Times, to sort of tell your story? Is it on your own platform? Is that the answer? Because in a way, this is quite a depressing story, because this is somebody who wants to, get truths out there using the skills that you've developed, and you're saying you've hit some brick walls, some pretty depressing brick walls.
Which I think everyone can relate to, and so every journalist can relate to in one way or another. I have been using social media, which I think is also fraught and flawed in all kinds of ways. I'm at the mercy of the algorithms of these tech companies.
And these tech companies are not particularly wild about the kinds of messages you're putting out either.
No. So it's imperfect, and I don't know, we just keep on trying. I'll say yes to doing a podcast like this in the hopes that that language about genocide, someone hears it and it shifts someone's thinking. I don't know.
So do you have a sense of how you should get the truth out?
No, I think
in a world of tech bros and populist governments.
Yeah. I think we have to just constantly be really, really creative and keep on thinking, not get kind of stuck in our ways. I think a lot, again, I know I keep on coming back to it, but I think a lot about language. Like, I was raised by two parents who spoke English as a second language, and that informs my journalism because it informs the words that I use for stuff. If there is a simpler word, I'm not going to use the more complicated word if it captures the truth just as accurately.
Yeah.
Like, I'm constantly trying to think about accessibility for different audiences. I think about one of the things that I think is sometimes effective about these charts that I make is that you can share them on WhatsApp with your auntie. They can be shared across different platforms. Yeah. I try to do like these small little things where like I'll post it in one color palette on Instagram and one color palette on like Twitter or on other platforms to see if it comes up against in another context. I'll be able to see, where did someone, like where exactly did they find this potentially?
I mean, there's a lightheartedness to illustration and to your illustration and a wit to it, which I'm not getting from this conversation. No. I mean, has something happened to you? I mean, like,
miserable, Krishnan.
To be honest, you're coming over as that, and I'm wondering, have you been made miserable? Were you a light-hearted, witty person who was trying to spread messages in a clever way, who has been beaten down by the realities of what's going on in Gaza? Or you're always like this, just making witty content?
This playfulness that I do sometimes use in my illustrations, there's often like a time and a place where it doesn't apply to all subjects. And I think, it's been really, really hard to find any degree of light when you are reporting on this and you're seeing the images that I'm seeing every single day. Obviously, it takes a massive toll on your mental health. Yeah, I'm just a person. It's not even about like the employment opportunities for me. It's just how it's personally affecting to be doing some of this work. And I think that journalists are very often afraid of talking about that because, again, it implies you're biased, you're not neutral. But also, like, if I was to say to you, do you find it disturbing the images that you are seeing of Palestinian children in Gaza? Of course you're going to say yes. Like, how can you not say yes? It is just affecting. I'm really, really miserable. It's a shame because I used to be able to have some fun on a conversation like this, and I'm not really feeling that right now. Yeah.
So is what you're trying to communicate changing then? The topics you're covering?
I don't know. I'm quite lost, to be honest. It's like, and I feel it's the case of so many of us. We're just like, what is it that I'm doing right now? What impact is this having? Why am I doing it? And yet the idea of not doing what I'm doing is unthinkable because I simply can't do nothing. So I just carry on, and it feels, it's really difficult. It's quite crazy making.
I mean, one of the really interesting things you're doing is a cartoon.
Yeah. Let's change the subject.
On Amazon.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
no.
It's changing the subject, but it's also not. In that you're doing something that's looking at Muslims in America and all the sort of politics with a small p around that. How women wear a hijab, how families try and blend in. I mean, how did that come about? How easy was it to get commissioned?
Yeah, so Rami Youssef, who had co-created the show with Pam Brady, got in touch with me in the early summer of 2020. So the pandemic had just started. He and Pam had this idea to create this animated show that was set in 2001. He got in touch with me to see if I could pitch on visual ideas for the language of the show. So Number One Happy Family USA is a animated show about an Arab Muslim family, and it starts on September 10th, 2001. They're living in New Jersey, and it shows how their lives are kind of turned upside down by the political forces around them. And it was really interesting to me, again, as a journalist. Obviously, it was a very creative endeavor.
And it's funny.
It's very, very funny. Obviously, it was a creative endeavor, but that period also really, really informed my journalism. I'm sure it really, really informed your journalism too, right? This was going back to the flaws of journalism and racism. I watched the way that the lead up to the Iraq War was reported on. I'm Iraqi. I watched those headlines that were wrong, that were factually misleading, false. And so much of this show is about that world and the way that one particular community became really, really singled out overnight. Yeah.
What is the atmosphere in American TV right now around that kind of topic?
Yeah. I don't know if the show would get made today, to be totally honest. I feel like there has been a kind of a shift, I would say, in a lot of media to be oh God, we should probably be catering more to conservative audiences.
I mean, you have networks who are clearly afraid.
Yeah. And they're right to be afraid. I mean, there have been lawsuits. National Public Radio has been defunded by this presidency. People are losing money. And as you know, people might have this sense we're sitting in a nice studio. Actually, journalism is really, really struggling financially. And without state support, it's very, very, very difficult to make good journalism. Yeah.
And for you as a data journalist, where do you do your journalism? Can you do your journalism at home? And do you yearn more to be on the ground?
Yeah. So funny when you say on the ground. I'm again, getting bogged down in language, but I feel so much of journalism actually uses the language of warfare, out in the field, on the ground, which I find quite
These
disturbing.
Are journalistic cliches.
I know they're cliches, but they have meaning, right? Yeah. It shapes the way that we think about the work that we do. I do spend a lot of the time at my desk, but I'm also always picking up the phone. I feel it's really, really important to ask people who have got lived experience. So whatever it is, let's say I'm reporting on, I'm doing some kind of chart about, I don't know, widowers and widowers by age. I want to speak to somebody who has had an experience of losing a spouse, partly to make sure that the work is tonally correct, that it feels like it's considerate and respectful. But I also want to speak to some people about the why. Data is so often flawed about telling you the why. It will tell you how something has changed, when it changed, where it changed, if it changed. But it's very, very bad at telling you why something has changed.
Yeah. No, I mean, I ask because, for me as a journalist, I spend obviously a huge amount of time in the studio.
Yeah.
But if I don't get out and go to the stories as well for a period of time, I go a bit crazy.
Yeah.
Because I feel disconnected from what's going on. So it's very, very important for me to get out. And I just wonder whether you feel that more now.
I do, yeah. And I felt it before. Again, I have this really cynical take on data. I don't believe that it's this perfect, more accurate way of understanding the world. I think very often it flattens out human experiences in ways that are quite damaging, right? If you're constantly just reporting on, for example, the average unemployment rate nationally, there are people who are going to be in cities across this country who are going to be wait a second, that doesn't represent our experience whatsoever. There's going to be demographic groups who are wait, that's not what things look like for me. So, yeah.
Because there was a sort of fetishization of data, wasn't there? Where people thought, well, you can't argue with data, you can't argue with numbers because they're facts.
Yeah.
Actually, you can.
You can. And even though I still think we're part of that fetishization, I think we're still seeing it now. I mean, it's definitely the case in tech, isn't it? That data is everything.
So what do you think people should understand about data and data journalism?
I think they should understand that it is also flawed and that it's really, really important that they look at what the sources of that information are and that they then go and question the reliability of those sources. So, for example, even if it's something as simple as like a poll, right? So I'll give a poll that comes to mind. Like there was a poll, did you see these Haaretz polls that were done quite recently about Israeli public opinion and what percentage of Israelis believed that, like, you know, all of Gaza should be flattened? Again, with a poll like that, I want to understand how many people were asked. Was it all across the country? Which age groups were asked? You know, generally anything less than 1,000 people really isn't considered particularly reliable. What was their methodology? And it's really hard, right? Because even as I'm saying these things, it's quite unreasonable actually to expect every reader, every viewer to do that work every single time when they're presented with information. But I think if you can do it at least some of the time, you start to better understand, okay, the distinctions, let's say, between Channel 4 News and Fox News, because you'll quickly see the way that these two sources use information is very, very different.
And do you think these are, I mean, it's like being able to spot fake news as well, isn't it? I mean, do you think these are skills that we will all have to get pretty quickly if we want to discern the truth from the lies?
Yeah. I think what I worry is happening is that a lot of people are just opting out. Don't you think a lot of people are just like, this is really confusing,
so just avoid it?
Yeah. And people are questioning whether or not it relates to their daily lives. They're finding it distressing. Like, oh, it's very, very upsetting hearing what's happening in Palestine. So they're just looking away. And that really worries me as well. And that's, again, part of the reason why I use illustration. Like, it is important to show that there are Palestinian children who have literally been beheaded. And at the same time, there is a place for those photographs, and it's not what I use in my work, partly because I know that as soon as I publish that photograph, there are so many people who are either going to want to unfollow me, keep scrolling, because it's upsetting. And it should be upsetting, but also there's, you know, we're all doing different roles in terms of the visual information that we're sharing.
And
it's so rough. I'm sorry. I know it is so miserable. And like, it's not fun. I'm trying to think of anything that's like less miserable to talk about, Krishnan.
It's striking, you know, how do you feel more affected by this than you did the Iraq War?
That's a really good question too. I mean, it's so different in some ways. In 2003, I was 15 years old. I don't even think I actually get very upset thinking about what my parents were living through because I didn't grasp it at all at the time. I think I'm more affected by this in some ways, again, because I'm just at a very different place in my life, but also because I feel very, very afraid of complicity. That's what I'm really talking about when I'm obsessing over whether or not we use the language of genocide or war. I actually think to use the language of war is to be complicit in the language and the messaging that the Israeli state wants journalists to be using. And so that's why I'm so deeply troubled right now, is like, in which ways am I complicit? By the things that I'm buying, by the things that I'm saying, by the websites that I'm reading. As an adult, you are burdened with that guilt in a different kind of way.
Do you feel the need to start living more literally, you know, not buying goods, not just from Israel, but from America or wherever else? I mean...
Yeah, I mean, I personally...
You're living in America.
Yeah, I am, which is complicated. I'm paying taxes in America. I'm paying taxes in this country. This is also a country which is materially supporting the genocide. Yeah, I'm again talking about how journalism could change, right? I don't see much news reporting about the efficacy of resistance movements. That's not really part of our vocabulary in journalism, right? Like, it feels surprising, I guess, to imagine an evening broadcast that is talking about whether or not BDS, for example, is working. And I feel like actually that is the kind of journalism that could also help to change the world by letting people know what works. And I do believe that BDS, it might not be working as much as it should right now, as much as it could. If more people were involved. Again, for me, my main priority is the knowledge that I'm not being complicit, rather than this idea that it's going to make the genocide stop. But I also believe it can be effective in at least slowing down the rate of killing.
Well, Mona, we must leave it there. Thank you so much for being so open about the dilemmas and the misery, I suppose, around confronting what you do. I hope you enjoyed that. You can watch all of these interviews on the Channel 4 News YouTube channel. Until next time, bye-bye.